Okay, colleagues, if I can bring you back together again. I felt that was like a confessional there. I had a couple of colleagues coming up, delegates saying, excuse me, can I have a wee minute? Just to let you know, I have to go because I've got this and that. What if I fill in my evaluation form? I've sent an email. The panic in their faces because they're desperate to get one of the packs. Can I also just draw your attention to the pack? I meant to mention this earlier on. We should have also put a magnifying glass into the pack as well, but there's this sheet, and if you can read it, at the very top it says about the walking workshops. We'll speak about that later on, but if you've got a wee bit of time and your eyesight is fantastic, if you could actually have a wee look through it so that you could get an idea of something that might interest you for later on. So moving on now, I was a wee bit worried about the way time was, but Suzanne says, please don't worry, I'll be on time. So we're aiming for lunch at 12:30. So can I maybe ask Suzanne to come back and give the second part of our presentation?
Yes, Suzanne said 12:30 is fine. 12:30 tomorrow is no problem. I'm actually going to really aim to even leave us a few minutes for questions, okay? Because I hope that I've stirred lots of you up. In fact, I have already heard over the break that I've stirred lots of you up. Good. That's what I wanted to do. And so if we have a chance for more voices than just mine, then we have a sense of what's happening out there. But that is a big challenge for Suzanne to stop talking because there's so much exciting stuff to talk about. That's why this is just a taster. Okay, literally, we could talk for days. This is a taster to get you wound up and to help you think in new ways about why relationships are so essential to human health and happiness and our very biology. And one word for that is attachment. So what I've been trying to do in the first half of this morning was to get us to really think, are we getting it? Lots of people are worried about it. And then to really understand the innate connection, that we are biologically wired for connection, and that it shapes our brains. And I haven't talked at all about the details of brain development. I'm not going to. I thought it was very impressive that your chief exec knew the word cerebellum. Like, I now want to do this really fast survey that finds out how many chief execs even know that word. But I'm not going to talk about the cerebellum, even though I could, and even though I think it's really exciting. I actually have talked about the things that I think are most important. I have already talked about the innate connection that we're born with, and I have already helped us to question, why are we not getting this? And I would love it if the White House called me. I'll need to hold someone's hand. Several people have said to me, okay, why isn't the Scottish government, with its aims, do I think it understands this stuff? I don't know. I'm doing my best. If they want to call me and say, why did you send all these people to contact us and send these emails? Good. Then what do we need to do to help boost their confidence? Because there's some areas that I think we're still dealing with silos, and we're not joining up what would really help us to do this. Okay, so if that's what we've spent the morning doing, I now want to talk a bit about attachment, because that's the words that you are really using here. And I know we're using the word nurture, but there are some areas that have the word nurture without using the word attachment a lot. Okay? And I often talk about attachment, but it's especially exciting here because you are really trying to get your heads around what that means. And I want to be sure that every single one of 200 of you leaves here today confident about your ability to talk to other people about attachment. So can I ask, how many of you, before you came today, knew the word attachment? Can you put your hands up? Look around the room. Okay, that's almost all of you. Good. Can I ask, how many of you have had some sort of formal training in attachment? And by that, I mean like You did a little bit of it on your course, you went for a day's training, you got the e-course on it, something that gave you a little bit of training on it. Cheryl, look around the room. That's a whole lot of people, that's celebratory, that's not everybody. So that's useful for us to realize that lots of people have heard the word, but not everybody has had training on it so that they have some more sense of what it is. Let me ask, in fact, can I ask this, if there are brave people to say, is there anybody in this room who would put their hand up that say before today you did not know the word attachment? Okay, there's a lovely, brave woman there. In fact, 2 of you. Would you put your hands up? You just went like that. Okay. Okay. There may be a few people in this room. It's hard to raise your hand when you're saying, I didn't know that. That's hard, okay? That's why it's sometimes hard to find out who does know about attachment or anything else. Let me ask one more question. How many of you, because most of you just said that you've been on some sort of training, feel confident about your understanding of attachment and you could walk out of here and explain it to the woman at the bus stop? Put your hands up. Put your hands up high. Look around the room. Cheryl, look. That's not nearly as many hands as went up before. That's quite a lot of you, and that is celebratory, but it's not as many hands as went up to say that you had training on attachment, and I also love it. I said, how many of you feel confident? And you went like this. So here is this fascinating, fabulous thing about attachment. Lots of people have had training in it, but I find that many people are still confused. Sometimes because it has words in it that is confusing to people. And secondly, you're not sure how much you have to know before you're allowed to say that you're confident, which is why you need to check if it's okay with your colleagues. I want to send us out of here in the next hour so that you are all confident enough to go, yes, I get it. Yes, I can talk to the woman at the bus stop. Yes, I can put my hand up. Okay, so how am I going to do that? How do we help people to get confident about attachment? Most people, when they talk about attachment theory, start with this diagram. Can I ask how many of you have seen this diagram before? Look around the room. That's a whole lot of you. This is a very common diagram that people pull up, and then they start to explain it in explaining attachment theory. I'm no starting there. I'm starting here, okay? Attachment theory is great, but I don't think it's always the best place to start. Let's go back to the kind of place I like to go to, and let's go back to real babies and real experiences. What this is a video of a 3-month-old baby showing how connected they are. So we're going back to this idea of innate connection. And you're going to see in this film the baby and the baby's mother and Dr. Zeedyk's much younger sister. Can our lovely tech people press play?
Just how crucial the first year is to a child's future development is emerging here at Dundee University.
Well, what we're going to do is get you just to interact with Center, just as you normally would with him sitting here and kind of smile and talk and things like that. And
Dr. Suzanne zeedyk has spent the past 6 years trying to understand what babies need for healthy development. The latest research shows that it's the quality of interaction between a child and a carer that's crucial, particularly during the first year.
okay? All right. See, we've got this looking conversation going on. Baby's looking at mom's face, eye gaze is really tight, smiling, really intense kind of looking here. Okay, so we've got the conversation going on. Hi, Susan. What the baby is getting from this kind of interaction is it's learning that that what it's doing has an impact on what other people are doing. So that when it looks at mom, mom looks back at it. That's the sort of thing that, although it looks very, very subtle, it doesn't look like a lot. It's these kinds of things that are crucial to interaction at this age.
To show how a child's sense of well-being is dependent upon the quality of interaction, Dr. Zeedyk has asked this mother to stop responding to her baby. The child's reaction demonstrates what happens if it does not receive this kind of stimulation.
So here, mom's face is now being held still. She's not responding to what the baby's doing. And you can start to see the discomfort there. You see how it looks away? It now looks really withdrawn and kind of spotty. It checks back with mom. She doesn't smile. It tries. It even tries to smile. She doesn't respond. Its smile goes away. The baby's looking down. It's not even trying to interact. If this goes on and on over a long term, you're going to get a withdrawn child who doesn't understand that other people will interact with it. And if it doesn't understand that other people interact with it, you don't have a healthy person.
It's fascinating watching your faces, because when the baby is happy and smiling, you're happy and smiling. And as the baby stops smiling, your faces drop too. And one or two people toward the end of that clip actually turned and reached for the hand of the person sitting next to them to help them with the experience of watching a baby cope with their mother not smiling back at them. This is just a little clip of a little tiny moment. And yet, it conveys something about the emotions in the baby, and it brings out emotions in you. So if I got you to be brave and supply some words, what's a word that you think captures what that baby is feeling by the end of that clip? Sad, lovely. Say it loudly. Abandoned, lovely, okay. Confused, lovely. Afraid? Say that again. Bereft. Oh, I love you. Listen to these strong words, because let's think about this, because this lies at the heart of the attachment system. All that happened here is a mother did not smile back at her baby. Actually, that's not quite all. Actually, the mother didn't smile back twice. Because what happens is that the baby's saying, oh, I love it when we play this game. You smile at me and I smile at you. I love that game. Why aren't you smiling anymore? That's weird. Don't like this. When the baby turns away from what is an uncomfortable moment, that's a fight or flight response. But a 3-month-old baby can't go anywhere because they can't even crawl yet. And this one is safely strapped into their car seat. So the best flight that baby can engage in is turn his head. So the baby flees the unsmiling mother. And that's good, because when the baby looks away, he can calm down a little bit, he can self-regulate, and he's got a little bit of space to think. And clearly this baby goes, I don't know why you aren't smiling. I don't really like it, but you don't usually do that, do you? No, you don't mean that, do you? You don't mean that, do you, Mom? No, you don't mean that, because look, here I am. Oh my God, you do mean it. Is that what you saw? Okay. So all you saw was a mother not smile at her baby twice. And your colleagues think the baby is abandoned, confused, bereft. So that means that every single one of you in this room who have ever raised or worked with a 3-month-old have smiled at them every single time they smiled at you, right? You never missed a smile. Parents are different in North Lanarkshire than anywhere else in the country. They never miss a baby's smile. I'm trying to get us to laugh because we are back in dark territory here, okay? And it lets us question, what is the thing at the heart of the attachment system? You do not need to have smiled at your baby every single time they smiled, okay? If at some level, any parent or child care staff in this room is a little bit anxious, let me relieve you. You do not need to smile at your baby every single time they smiled. Breathe out. In fact, we tend to miss about 2/3 of babies' bids for attention in our busy lives while we're doing dishes and hanging up coats and kissing our beloved hello, welcome back home, and doing all the sorts of things in life. We miss about 2/3 of bids. And babies grow up healthily. And in fact, when people don't miss babies, when people miss babies' bids, is part of what fuels development, because it gets them to try harder. That's what we saw that baby do. Mother didn't smile the first time, the baby tried again. So babies can grow up healthy without having hovering parents all the time. And you get the idea from hovering is not actually good for babies. On the other hand, there will be babies in this world who don't get their needs met even a third of the time, is one thing it tells us. Another thing that this clip tells us is just because the baby can still grow up healthy and have bids missed doesn't mean that the baby didn't notice. This is this thing about connected brains. Babies notice so much more than we actually realize. I have not talked about brain development today, but babies' brains are growing at the rate of 750 synaptic connections a second. They notice everything, and they supply it with meaning, just like the baby that was doing that. The babies think it's meaningful. Everything is meaningful to their brain because they don't know what is and isn't meaningful. They need to find out what happens again and again and again, and their brain is tracking that. This is a saber-toothed tiger moment for this baby. In fact, two saber-toothed tiger moments. And the baby doesn't know that evil Dr. Zeedyk's younger sister got the mother to do that. The baby can only conclude that the baby did something to cause the mother to do that. That's the only thing the baby's brain can conclude. So if I, the mother, also pull out my mobile phone, and the baby's looking at me, and I'm doing my mobile phone, the baby doesn't know about mobile phones. The baby's brain is still back in saber-toothed tiger time. The baby thinks that the mother doesn't want to engage. So the baby might go, and I might go like this in the buggy while I'm doing this. The baby can sustain it for a bit, but after a bit, the baby will give up. That's all at the heart of the attachment system, okay? This is not typically called attachment. This is called the strange situation paradigm. This is a fancy scientific setup. But this reminds us what is at the heart of the attachment system, and I think this is more important than attachment theory, as fabulous as attachment theory is. So I think this is more insightful than that image. That image is fascinating, and when we come back for a residential with all your sleeping bags, we can talk about that. But my real question, if lots of you have been for training, and lots of you had that slide, but lots of you did not say, I am confident that I know what attachment is and I can explain it to the woman at the bus stop, how can we help people to get that? Okay, one is to show babies. Another is to talk about the history of attachment work. So this is where I like to start when I talk about attachment theory. And I like to start here for two reasons. This is the 1950s, and the 1950s lies at the heart of the attachment theory science story. So in the 1950s and late 40s, that's where attachment theory is born, here in Britain. And it spreads across the world, and some of the leading theorists are now based in the US and based in Holland and based in other countries, but it starts here in the UK. And it starts with practical problems. It starts with practitioners, problems that psychologists and scientists set out to try to help with, even if the practitioners didn't realize it was a problem. And one of the key problems was children in hospitals. So now we're in the 1950s in children's hospitals. And this is a little girl named Laura. And she's 2. And she's at the heart of a film called A 2-Year-Old Goes to Hospital, which was made in 1952 by a psychologist named James Robertson. Interestingly, who came from not far away, he came from Rutherglen. Lots of people forget that, so I chuck that in now, okay? So not that far. Okay. And James Robertson has been doing work on attachment. And because of the knowledge that he gets, he begins to worry about hospital policies. Because in the 1950s, as several of you in this audience are already going like this, so that means that I know you know something about this personally somehow. You were in hospital, you had a parent in hospital, you had a sibling in hospital. Children who went to hospital in the 1950s, what typically happened is that, let me pretend to be the mother. I have a child because they have a scheduled operation, say they need a hernia sewed up, or they have an eye operation scheduled, or they have something sudden happen, they break their leg really badly, they have a terrible asthma attack, they get an incredibly bad case of chickenpox, and I bring my child to hospital where they're going to be helped medically. keeping in mind this is also the birth of the National Health Service. And the matron says, thank you very much, Mrs. Johnson. Let me have your child. It's Tuesday. We'll see you on Saturday between 3 and 4 when our visiting hours are. Bye. I'm going to wind that up. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Give me your 2-year-old. We'll take good care of her. It's Tuesday. You can come back on Saturday. Can you feel the silence? Good. Because I need you to figure out what you would do as Mrs. Johnson. Because that's what parents all over the country had to decide in the 1950s. Who thinks that they're going to say, I'm so sorry, matron, I can't do that? Put your hands up. Really high. Look around the room. North Lanarkshire clearly has a lot of bolshy parents. Let's think about that. You are going to mess with a system. The matron says, thank you very much, Mrs. Johnson. I know this is a little bit difficult for you, but we take care of children all the time. We're used to this. Don't you worry. You go home. You have other children to take care of. You don't have a car because it's the 1950s and you're going to have to take the bus anyway. And I am not joking about this. Our records say that you have a husband and someone will need to make his tea. I'm not joking. That was a large part of the reason. I love it. There's a woman over here going. I'm trying to play this up so that we think about this. Because James Robertson gets worried about this. James Robertson says that that standard practice of sending parents home to come back on the Saturday between 3 and 4 was damaging the children in the hospital where their parents had brought them to be taken care of. Now, there's a number of people in this audience whose heads are going like this, which say to me they have some experience. Are there any of you, I know it's a big audience, because sometimes people go, I was that child in hospital. Look, and I'm not getting to the next slide yet. Is there anybody here who wants to say, I was a child in hospital, and say something of your story? Lovely, brave woman. Can you stand up? Because it is much better if you hear it from real people than you hear a scientist talking about it.
It was 1960.
Tell them.
1963, went to Stonehouse Hospital, and my mum and dad taken me from Moodysburn, and that's exactly what happened. They had to go home, and I came back. They didn't come for me on the Saturday. I went home in an ambulance with about another 5 or 6 children, but I can remember it vividly.
How old were you?
I would be
5.
5.
And do you remember what you felt?
I do remember how I felt.
Can you give us a word for it?
I think I was afraid.
And tell us your name.
Therese Henry.
Therese was 5, and she was afraid. The hospital made her afraid. Therese, thank you. See that personal story? That's more important than the science. We're going to have another person later this afternoon who's going to tell us their personal story. I think those personal stories are more important than the science because they are real lived lives. But something happens that when we have real lived lives and we have stories of real lived lives, it's not enough for our services. We need the science. I know we need the science. That's why I did the crazy thing and I quit my well-paid, well-pensioned job. I don't have a pension anymore, guys. Okay? I don't have a pension. I don't know what's going to happen when I get to be 65 and I need a pension. So I know we need the science, but we need the real lived lives as well to help us to really get it. Because here's what happens. James Robertson and his colleagues collect data, and they make lovely graphs. And they go around the hospitals saying, we think that children are being damaged by standard policy, and we're learning about this thing that's going to come to be called attachment theory, and we think we can help make it better. We know what to do to tell you make it better, and the first thing is we need to have parents stay. And the graphs and the data didn't convince them. So James Robertson tries again, and he says, I know what I'll do. I'll make a film. So he makes a film about a little girl named Laura, and he follows her time in hospital. Part of it is entertaining because it was 1952. Cine cameras had just come out. He'd never operated a cine camera before. The funding they had let them buy a cine camera and 80 minutes of film, the end. He used 4 minutes of the film to learn how to operate the camera. And the other 76 minutes is the film. I love that little tiny background because you think, okay, this is a guy who really says, I'm going to learn to do this. We can do this. Let's make a film about a little girl in distress. You can still get that film. In fact, sometimes it's used in training. In fact, we had a screening of it around the country in 2015 along with other films, including Babyhood, which is in your pack, to help people. So we thought, okay, we'll try films as a way to help people to get it. Okay, so this was one of them. Okay, so if you purchase this film now, here's how it's described on the packaging. It says this film classic, made in 1952, drew attention to the plight of young patients at a time when visiting by parents was severely restricted and is still going on in 1963, so we're nearly a decade on. It shows a study of the typical emotional deterioration in an unaccompanied young patient and of the subtle ways in which she shows or conceals deep feelings of distress. Now, I have highlighted emotional deterioration because that's what Robertson thought he saw. And we've been playing with language. I had lots of title slides to start with. The language he used, the title he gave to what he saw happening to her was emotional deterioration. That was not the language that the staff used. When the children quit crying and quit being upset, because when Mrs. Johnson hands over her child, what do you think a 2-year-old is likely to say? Mommy, 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 mommy! Leave Mrs. Johnson, she'll be fine when you're gone. I'm trying to wind us up. How am I doing? I want us to think about how a child's request, a real lived life, wasn't enough to have a hospital think, wonder what that means. And why we needed the science, best Robertson could give it to us at the time, to help colleagues think. Because they didn't call it emotional deterioration when the little girl stopped crying and sat cuddled with her teddy bear. Do you know what they called it? Can you guess? It's a word we still have in childcare. Say that louder. The child had settled. What Robertson called emotional deterioration, the childcare staff, the nurses, called settling. And the place we still have that word in our world today is in childcare. So if we are very brave, we can start to wonder, do we see anything like this in childcare today that we're still calling settling that could be damaging children? Because, of course, I'm trying to tell a story which helps us to understand the beginning of attachment theory science. But this is not just history. This grew into attachment theory and attachment science. And we still have it today. So the real question becomes, what was hard for the staff to hear about this from Robertson? Why was that? Because if his graphs hadn't worked, neither did his film. Because a decade on, we still have children whose hospitals are operating this procedure. And when he releases this film, hospitals go into uproar. There was so much controversy about this film, they had to take it off of general release because it was too upsetting to medical staff. So let's think about this a bit more. You can imagine that you are now the nurses, and this young psychologist-trained chap comes along and says, I've been watching what you're doing, your professional practice, and I'm kind of worried this damaging the children, but I know what to do and I can tell you how to fix it. Please don't you want to see my film and know what I have to say? What do you think the staff felt? Say that again. Off his head. You are nuts. The children are fine. What else did they feel? Offended. Threatened, thank you. See, it takes you should never try and do something interactive with 200 people. But I get, connection, threatened. He comes along with ideas that could help improve practice for children, and they felt threatened because he was implying that they were doing something that damaged children. He spent 20 years trying to figure out that sense of feeling threatened. People's professional integrity was impugned. How dare you say that I'm doing something that damages children? I'm just doing what everybody else does. My managers told me it's fine. I've talked to my manager about it, and she says that she's spoken to the head of the hospital, and they don't have the funds that let us have beds for mothers. We're doing our best. What if our best is still damaging children? Cheryl and her team have done something unfortunate. They have made you look at this. And once you see it, you then have to decide if good enough, if best practice is still good enough. Because what if best practice is damaging children? Still. That's why it's so important that you know what you think. I will not be in all your settings after today. You need to know what you think, and you need to be able to spot where you think is a problem, and you need to figure out how to speak to your colleagues to address it, because otherwise we damage children. And it has a long-lasting impact. So when I blog about this stuff, I often get people who write to me. Okay, this is a gentleman who wrote to me when I wrote a blog about Robertson and early attachment, who's 65 years old, and he wrote to say, I was one of those children in hospital. And he says, now I'm 65. When I look back when I was 4, and I went into hospital with my sister, I can remember and reimagine that stay. And I can clearly see my sister through the glass window where they put them in separate rooms with a glass window between them where we could touch hands but not speak to each other. And I can still feel my distress at waking one morning to find her gone when they wouldn't tell me where they had taken her. And they didn't know that I'd been told by my mother to look after my baby sister. And I had now lost her. I had failed my mother. That's more than 60 years ago, and it still hurts me. It's really powerful what happens for children. And when you go on to read more about his story that's included in that blog, he went back to hospital one more time when he was 7. And his life was a hard life. In fact, he spent some time in psychiatric treatment. And he couldn't figure out, even with the help of doctors, what he thought that his struggles were due to. And when he finally learned about attachment, he thinks he figured out the source of his struggles in life. And it was a hospital stay, 2 hospital stays, when he was a child. So even when they did get hospitals to shift, and lots of them were shifting by the 70s, although I still have people who say to me, I was a child in hospital, or I was a mother of a child in hospital, and let me tell you what happened to me. Once practice shifts, we still have the consequences for children who were in the period before practice had shifted. So the longer it takes us to shift practice and to put into place what we know, the more children who are at risk of suffering until we got our act together. You are very brave to travel this with me. You didn't know I was going to tip you into darkness. But I'm trying to do that to get us to really to take it seriously, because I know we may be doing our best, but if that is still damaging children, then it's not good enough. And we need to acknowledge that our best is damaging children, and then figure out again, is that really our best? Because if we don't get it, we cause the kind of heartbreak that I've already talked about with children in care. And when we hear about trauma later this afternoon, what we're effectively hearing about is heartbreak. What language do we use? So I hope that after me playing up that story, taking us to a dark place, you might be thinking, okay, what is attachment? What is the operational definition of attachment in North Lanarkshire? Because it turns out people have used different language to talk about attachment. Here's the language that Bowlby used to talk about attachment. And Bowlby's allowed to have language because he started attachment theory. He's the grandfather of attachment theory. Lots of people know about Bowlby. Can I ask you to put up your hand if you know John Bowlby's name? Look around the room. That's zillions of people in this room. Huge numbers of people in this room. Okay. That was a joke. That was a bad political joke. Huge numbers of people putting... Bad joke. Okay, skip that then. Okay, right. This is Bowlby's definition of attachment. Proximity seeking to the attachment figure in the face of threat due to the capacity to sense conditions that could be dangerous. That is, being alone, unfamiliarity, rapid approach. This is accurate. It has to be accurate. It's Bowlby saying it. But if we want everybody to understand attachment, I don't think that language is helpful to us. I want it in the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail is unlikely to publish words like proximity seeking and attachment figure. So part of what happens, I think, is that people get this language, but it isn't language that they feel really secure with. Okay, here's another person to talk about attachment. This is Pat Crittenden. Can I ask how many people have had Pat Crittenden included in their attachment training? Put your hands up. Look around the room. I could almost count the number of hands that went up on one hand. Here's something interesting in our training in attachment. This is Pat Crittenden. She's a theorist alive and well, and she is still helping us think. This is her language, the organization of mental and behavioral strategies for protection of the self and progeny. It extends from infancy to adulthood. So she's working in Bowlby's thinking, and she follows Bowlby's thinking. She's trying to stress it goes all the way to adulthood. But words like progeny are probably not going to make it into the Daily Mail either. So this language doesn't suit yet, and still. Very few people know about Pat Crittenden, even though she's doing very helpful thinking, but many people know about Bowlby. I need to let you know something. Bowlby's gone. He died. It's very sad. It happens to a lot of people. He was very helpful to us in thinking about attachment, but he can't help us anymore. People like Pat Crittenden can help us, but most people don't know who she is. So this weird thing happened. We got stuck in the 1970s with Bowlby's theory, and when people get training in attachment theory, they hear about Bowlby's language and Bowlby's models. And that is not the only language that we could use, but we got very stuck to it. So I get interested when we start to have different ways of thinking about attachment and know that North Lanarkshire is trying to come up with an operational definition that they think is accessible to the workforce, because other people have struggled with that as well. This is Harry Burns. Harry Burns was our chief medical officer until about 2 years ago when he resigned, and people are still grieving that. They are, with good reason, because chief medical officers, they do things like liver disease and heart disease and broken leg treatment. Harry Burns, as our chief medical officer, went about the country talking about attachment. And he said that that was the thing that would help to solve many of Scotland's health problems. And he used a really different language. This is his language. He said attachment is individuals feeling in control of their lives, and that young people who don't experience consistent parenting are less able to manage themselves in stressful situations. He used a totally different language. He used the language of stress. And that made it onto the front page of the Times in 2013. It's not yet the Daily Mail, but it has more people talking about it, using the language of stress instead of proximity seeking and safe base. So if other people can talk about attachment using different language, so can this woman named Suzanne Zeedyk. So Suzanne Zeedyk says that attachment is having an internal teddy bear on whom you can call when you need comfort, no matter what your age. So since she's with you, I thought I would just tell you what she means. You may have already today heard her say, babies are scared of saber-toothed tigers, which they are, because those helpless babies that get brought into the world really early in the developmental time frame are helpless. Other mammals, like dogs and cats and well, dogs and goats and horses can walk in minutes. Cats and dogs take a couple of weeks. But human babies take a year, even if you have a father who's trying to get you to skip the crawling stage and get to the walking stage. So if a predator comes into your village and is looking for somebody to eat, they're going to prey on the most vulnerable ones, even if they are safely strapped into their car seat. Saber-toothed tigers are quite happy to eat plastic car seats if you get a baby in the middle of them. Because if a saber-toothed tiger came through that back door and a couple of us saw frightened faces looking, we would quickly get that. There would be a mad panic to get through that door. And if everybody ran out that door and there's a baby here on the stage with me, that baby needs to know that someone is going to remember to pick him up. And in fact, if the saber-toothed tiger is making his way to the baby and we're all running out the door, that baby needs to know in their deepest soul that somebody will run back in and do battle with the saber-toothed tiger to save the baby. They will claim the baby from danger. And if the baby doesn't learn that that's what will happen because they have lots of experiences of someone, their parent, their granny, their child care worker, stepping in when they are feeling anxious, if they don't have those experiences, then they learn that the world is a scary place because no one comes to help them in their vulnerability. At the heart of the attachment system is the fear of death. I once got asked to come and give a talk, and I thought, okay, that audience won't want to just hear about connected babies. They sound sweet. This is an audience that does a lot of thinking about it. I will give them a more interesting title. And so I settled on, what if I called it, Why Babies Are Born Afraid They're Going to Die? It didn't work. They revoked my invitation. And I thought, okay, it's true, but it's too scary to tell people that up front. They need to know about connected babies, because that feels safe. But part of the point of vulnerable babies is that they are afraid that if they do not have someone to help them with their distress, then what they learn is that the world is an anxious place that they have to deal with on their own. So they end up with a physiology that is simply more anxious. That lies at the heart of the attachment system. So how do you counter that? With teddy bears. Coping with anxiety is not about coping or managing behavior. The way to cope with anxiety is to be able to comfort it. Is to have an internal teddy bear that we can draw on and go, it's okay, it's okay. So perhaps Jared said, it's okay, she's running over time, it's okay. Can I comfort myself? Or do I need to tell her to stop now? Oh, what do I do? Right, as his heart starts to go like that. Now I can signal, go, it's okay, I've got my eye on the time. I can help him calm down. But if he doesn't know, he starts to get anxious. He's in charge of making this whole show run to time, and he may not be able to control me. He needs a strong teddy bear, because Dr. Zeedyk has a real reputation that nobody control her, get her to stop talking. He needs a strong internal teddy bear then. A baby needs a strong internal teddy bear when mommy doesn't come to pick him up at childcare. And when every day she is the very last one, because he doesn't know that her employers won't let him off. What he knows is that he sits through 10 episodes of disappointment as the doorbell goes, and it's never his mommy. I love that. Several of you looked at each other. Probably, perhaps because you're thinking, oh no, I am that parent. It's okay if you are the last parent to pick up your child. But it's really important that your childcare then have a cuddle policy. Because it's sitting on someone's knee who will rock you while you cope with disappointment that will help grow a strong internal teddy bear. Our job is to help children grow strong internal teddy bears. Another word for that is a strong self-regulatory system, or to build resilience. All those words work. But one word is a strong internal teddy bear that lets me comfort myself when the lights don't change on time, or when I left for this conference this morning and I had a fight with my partner, and I'm anxious about going home. Because that will be true for some people in this room. They could be the person sitting next to you. They are anxious because this morning was chaotic. And actually, it's been chaotic every day for the last 2 years. If you've had a chaotic, disconnected, that couple's at risk of divorce because they can't find their way back to each other. They need our help. They need your help. And you may have no idea that that's what's happening to your colleague. What we will see is behavior. Do they know that they could ask for help? Do they trust enough to have a conversation? The attachment system is about asking for help when it gets too much, and in the course of that, growing a strong internal teddy bear. That's all attachment is. But that's everything that attachment is. And so all those young men who are in Pullman prison, 80% of them were in care. Their internal teddy bear is weak. They've had lots of heartbreaks. The role of the prison service should be to help repair that and to help them grow a stronger teddy bear. But unless you have governors of prisons who get that, what you can, and I have to say the current governor of Pullman Prison does get that, what you can do is the system can make it worse. How do we help everybody to get that at the heart of attachment is basically fear? How do we cope with that? And that if you didn't get it when you were a child, you can get it when you're older. We can grow stronger internal teddy bears now. It just takes more work. It's called therapy, touchy-feely. Meditation, yeah, well, I can't get to it every Friday, and that's the only time they have it in my community. Yoga. All those things sound a bit touchy-feely. And yet, if we're going to, since attachment is about the body, if we're going to make changes, it's bodily changes. Therapy works because it changes the body, not simply because it changes thinking in the head. At the heart of attachment is saber-toothed tigers and teddy bears. That's why in your pack there's a book called Saber-Toothed Tigers and Teddy Bears, because it's an attempt to help people to understand more about what attachment really means. And that those experiences get woven into the brain. I have not talked about brain development today, but if you simply get your heads around that those experiences get woven into the brain, if they happen a lot, then we begin to understand how they are embodied. Do those three ideas make sense to you? Yes? Okay then. Then just to stress that, different ways to say it. Human beings seek safety. Human beings seek belonging. Human brains seek belonging. All of those are just different ways of saying this key idea. Does that make sense? When you leave here, if someone says, do you feel confident about your understanding of attachment? Can you say, yes, let me explain it to you? How many of you feel like you could now do that to the woman at the bus stop? Okay, that's quite a lot of hands. That's not all hands, Cheryl. So we need the residential. Bring your sleeping bags. What I'm really trying to do is to help to give us new different ways of thinking about this, new language for talking about the importance of attachment. How do we make sense of it? How do we talk about it? What language do we need? We can map it onto that. They're both accurate, but some language may give some people more access than others. And I think we're at a point where we need to break free of our attachment to Bowlby language. Okay, now, there are lots of other, okay, If attachment were a movie, it would be It's a Wonderful Life. It would be about belonging, okay? If How to Get There were a different movie, that's how to get there. So in future packs, we could be giving out copies of It's a Wonderful Life, this attachment movie, or copies of Frozen, Let It Go. Because one of the things that happens when we haven't had enough experiences of help is that we ruminate and we stay with it, and we find it difficult to let it go. So actually, I think one thing we could do in North Lanarkshire is to have great big sing-ins of everybody learning to sing, let it go, let it go. Because what happens is that it becomes harder to let things go if you haven't got an internal teddy bear. Now, clearly there are other models. I'm skipping all of this because that's in the residential now, because I talked too much and I'm feeling responsible for causing no anxiety to our MC for the day. Because I want to end by coming back to this idea. How do we help people get it? Well, here's one more idea. We can do it with actual teddy bears. So those of you who stay to the end of the day will find that in your pack. Oh, look at that. That was cool. Can we do that again? Those of you who stay to the end of the day will find in your pack a real live teddy bear. And you'll see that this teddy bear is wearing a t-shirt. And if I give you a close-up, which is a bit blurry, this is a tiger fighting teddy. This bans saber-toothed tigers. And North Lanarkshire is now full of them. This is your team with 200 tiger fighting teddies on their desks. This is our latest attempt to try to give people resources that will help them to think about this. I love that teddies have become a resource now, because we need that word, resource. They're not just child size, they're adult sizes. So when you take away this resource, when you stay to the end of the day, we often think of teddies for children, but these are also adult sizes. These teddies go perfectly on the top of computers, because all computers contain saber-toothed tigers for adults. I once know somebody who shot their computer. I'm not joking. They shot their computer. And I thought, oh, you need help with your self-regulatory system. My question is, what do we need to help us to get these ideas and put them into practice? And if something as simple as a teddy bear helps to remind us of that language, and that would make a real difference for families or individuals, then perhaps we need to do more of that, because it gives us a real tool for helping us self-regulate in the middle of moments that are really tricky. So as I finally really do wind up, can I ask you to pull out your piece of paper one more time for two final questions? We have traveled some dark areas this morning, but I have tried hard to help us to laugh in the midst of them. Can you please tell me, in one word, how does this information leave you feeling? You can have 2 or 3 words if you really need them, but I was trying to make it easy for you. How does it leave you feeling? And finally, why? And it's an interesting question, feeling, because normally in evaluation, not yours very interestingly, you have 2 very interesting questions in your evaluation sheet, but mostly in evaluation sheets, we ask what people thought. We ask them to choose on a rating scale of 1 to 5. We ask what people think. And yet, if we really get attachment, what's important is how we feel, and whether it makes us feel excited or anxious, or because that is the place from which we will act. So, what does it make you feel and why? And then as I wind up, can I take us back to the beginning of where we started today? We started with this title, Building Resilient Communities. Do you have a new way of thinking about resilience now? Yeah? Because we've tried different language, like building communities of belonging. Resilience, belonging, welcome. They're all words for the same thing. It's the welcome and the belonging that creates the resilience, which is biological. I called it building communities that banish saber-toothed tigers. It's actually an overstatement, guys. We cannot banish saber-toothed tigers. They live in our brains and bodies, but we can develop the tools to fight them. And I really like the idea that the tools to fight saber-toothed tigers are simple little things like teddy bears. You are trying to build a community that fights saber-toothed tigers in North Lanarkshire. But the most important thing I then said was, that's why it's so important that children need you to understand the danger that saber-toothed tigers still present. And if you really get that, then you are ready to go and tell the woman at the bus stop. Thank you very much.